Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon.
It's the Popcorn Digest with Gareth and Andy. Popcorn Digest. Hello and welcome to Popcorn Digest, the podcast about the films you love and some you don't. I'm your host, Gareth Green, and joining me as always is my full-time co-host and part-time Hans Gruber impersonator, Andrew Raphael.
Oh, God! No!
There's a deep dive reference there as well for a Hans Gruber impersonation.
You're one of them, aren't you?
I really like how Alan Rickman can successfully play. He's an Englishman playing a German man, doing an impression of an American hick. And this week we're spending Christmas with the world's unluckiest action hero, as we ask, how can the same shit happen to the same guy twice? And then a further 3 more times. That's right, we're watching Die Hard 2, Die Harder, or as it's known in Germany, The Hard 2, The Harder. But is this a Christmas well spent? Find out after the trailer.
Listen, honey, when you land, can we check into a hotel, leave the kids with your parents, order some room service?
You're on, Lieutenant.
I'll see you in about a half an hour, honey.
Jingle bell, jingle bell rock.
Christmas Eve.
Is there a cop on duty around here?
Airport police.
Go get him.
Jingle bells swing and jingle bells ring.
Washington, D.C. International Airport.
What's this about?
Oh, just a feeling I have.
Ouch. When you get those feelings, insurance companies start to go bankrupt.
The towers lost control.
Instrument landing system is down.
Backup systems won't come up. We've got blizzard conditions. Zero visibility.
Attention all controllers. We have a code red alert.
There's panic in the air.
This is a professional mercenary. You got the world's biggest drug dealer on his way here now. What do you need, a slide rule to figure this out?
You get the hell out of my office before I throw you out of my damn airport.
And terror on the ground.
Who is this?
Who I am is unimportant. What I want is very important. Oh, we are just up to our neck in terrorists again, John.
But for police officer John McClane,
When I'm right.
it's just another Christmas.
You're the wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Story of my life.
A pre-Ambien addiction, Bruce Willis is back as John McClane, an everyday blue-collar American cop who finds himself up against his deadliest foe yet, the marginally visible ball bag of William Sadler. However, unlike most American cops, McClane spends his days protecting civilians, shooting extremists, and befriending black people? How unbelievable. Okay, so Die Hard 2, Die Harder. I mean, that is one of the best, worst titles ever, surely.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the official title is, because earlier on today I learnt that the subtitle of Die Hard 2, Die Harder was in place early on in the marketing, and then later it was dropped. And as you'll notice on the actual film, it's just known as Die Hard 2.
Die Hard 2.
But then subsequently, on home video release, the Die Harder moniker has been retained, so it's very confusing.
Yes, it's puzzled philosophers for years, honestly.
Yeah.
So, Andy, are you a fan of the Die Hard series? Is this your first tango with Bruce Willis's John McClane everyday action hero?
Yes, I'm a massive fan of the Die Hard trilogy.
Yes, the Die Hard trilogy. It's a trilogy that joins the ranks of, the Indiana Jones trilogy, the Star Wars trilogy.
Yeah.
The best trilogies. Yes, as am I. Again, also a huge fan of the Die Hard trilogy. Most, I would say, though, of Die Hard 1 and Die Hard with a Vengeance. Die Hard 2 was always, for me, the lesser of the Die Hard films, and yet, retrospectively, it's certainly gone up in my estimation in the years since. But when it was just a trilogy, it was always the weakest link in those core 3 films for me.
Yeah, but it's still my my third favourite.
Yes. Of 3.
Yeah, of 3. Yeah.
If I'm absolutely bluntly honest, I don't think Die Hard 4 or Live Free and Die Hard is a terrible film.
No, it's not.
I think it's a competent modern action film, but it doesn't have any Die Hard feeling whatsoever for me. It's just kind of a run-of-the-mill action thriller.
Starring Bruce Willis. As Bruce Willis of that time, I don't feel like he's playing John McClane at that point. And obviously even more so when you get to A Good Day to Die Hard.
A Good Day to Die Hard is still the only Die Hard film I have not seen all the way through.
Oh,
it's the first film of that series that I've turned off halfway through because I just found it incredibly boring.
Yeah.
But yes, for me, Die Hard 2, Die Harder, I was the one that said, let's do a couple of Christmas specials. We'll do a couple of Christmas-based films. And I knew when I put that gauntlet down, I said, you pick one and I'll pick one. And I already knew I was picking Batman Returns. But in the back of my mind, I was actually going to pick Die Hard 2. But then I thought, no, Andy's going to pick that. I know for sure Andy's going to pick Die Hard 2, Die Harder. And surely enough, you did. So, Andy, take the reins. Tell us a little bit about Die Hard 2.
Well, I mean, it's, for a Christmas movie, I mean, obviously, people always talk about the original Die Hard as being a Christmas movie, and for some, the ultimate Christmas movie.
The debate rages on.
Yeah. Even though all these films were released in the summer, which carries on from our previous conversation about Batman Returns. I thought we'd talk about Die Hard 2 because it is set at the same time of year as the original Die Hard, because they try and recreate that feeling. But not many people really talk about Die Hard 2.
No.
Because we generally tend to champion films that aren't talked about as much. I thought this would be a good pick because I've got a strange relationship. I think this is the Die Hard film I've probably watched the least out of the original 3.
Yes, same.
And I've probably seen this more like 10 times as opposed to the other ones where I probably watched those about 25, 30 times.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the one I'm least acquainted with. It's that awkward one in the middle because obviously Die Hard 1 and Die With a Vengeance are both directed by John McTiernan, and they have continuity in their bad guys. So this one is kind of the odd one out, even though it has probably more connective tissue to the original than the third one does.
Yeah. So moving on to the making of this film as well, because we always do this every single episode. It's all about laying the context down. Let's give some history for these films. So I don't actually know that much about Die Hard 2 in terms of the context. There's very little out there. So what I've done is I've done some research on, well, the making of Die Hard, where the character came from, other actors that were in contention for the role before Bruce Willis came along and made it his own. To begin, really, I think we have to go straight back to the source material, and Die Hard is actually based on a book, which is somewhat little known, I would say, in terms of a trivia fact. Not many people do regard Die Hard as one that is being based on a pre-existing material. But I would say it's very loosely so.
Yeah, very loosely.
And that book was Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe.
There's a Frank Sinatra film, isn't there, which is based on a previous book, which was The Detective, which was a film released in 1968. Die Hard as a film started off as a sequel to that film.
To the point in which Frank Sinatra had first refusal before they could offer it to any other person. So they had gone ahead and written this story about, a 30-something middle-aged cop who's having marital difficulties, and the first thing that they have to go to is Frank Sinatra, who's like 70 years old. Like, do you want to play John McClane? How good's your yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker?
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Fortunately, Frank Sinatra did decline. So I think that was to the relief of every single person involved with that film, with that script, because there was a short time where they were thinking, shit, he might say yes. Frank Sinatra might say yes. They were actually like shopping the character of John McClane out to a lot of different actors. And I'm just going to go through the many actors that this went through before it arrived with Bruce Willis. So obviously, as he was offered every single role from around this time, Arnold Schwarzenegger was first, and then we have Sylvester Stallone, Richard Gere, Clint Eastwood, Harrison Ford. I can see it being a Harrison Ford movie. It's not the Die Hard we know, but I can see it working as a Harrison Ford movie. Burt Reynolds was offered, Nick Nolte, Mel Gibson, Don Johnson, Richard Dean Anderson, Paul Newman, and James Caan. They were all offered it, and it eventually went to Bruce Willis almost as like a last-ditch offer, and they were so unsure about whether it was going to work with him as well as an actor that it was solidified by McTiernan's then girlfriend, who just happened to be sitting next to a representative from Cinema Score on a plane. She asked them about getting some information from audiences about whether or not Bruce Willis would be a draw for the film or not. And fortunately, it came back positive. That research came back to them as being positive. So 2 weeks later, he was cast. And then that's how John McClane came to be, essentially.
Yeah, because previous to that, he was a sitcom star.
Was it Moonlighting?
Moonlighting,
was the TV show he was in. And then the only other film that he was in as a lead was Blind Date. Which I remember watching one night at about 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I remember that being okay. It made me laugh a couple of times, but it's just a kind of wishy-washy romantic comedy. There's no hint of really the action star that Bruce Willis came to be.
Yeah.
But I would also say that that's the appeal of Bruce Willis.
Definitely,
is that,
well, at this time, anyway.
100% at this time.
I think he lost his funny bone in the 2000s.
And I would say as well, back then, there's a clear divide, like much clearer than it is now. There's a clear gulf between TV star and movie star.
Yeah.
Like, those are two separate worlds. Now, with the production values that TV shows have, you have a lot of TV shows looking like movies and a lot of movies looking like TV shows, and actors are jumping between the two. You have a lot of prestige TV that really attracts big-name Oscar winners and that type of thing.
There seem to be a certain group of actors that are now doing more TV work. I'm just thinking of, say, someone like Nicole Kidman.
I was 100% just thinking of her now. Fortunately as well, Die Hard comes out. It's a massive success. Audiences respond to John McClane, the character, in a big way. And that really brings us up then to Die Hard 2. And I believe that you have some information on the making of this film and how it came to be essentially from this point onwards.
Yeah. I mean, I've not really got any information on like how it was greenlit. I imagine it was just the standard thing of this film has been very successful, therefore we need a sequel. Robot executive. Signed dotted line. But it seems as if John McTiernan was involved to some extent, or did actually want to make the film, but was committed to directing Hunt for Red October. And I imagine the studio probably didn't want to wait for him to finish that film. So I imagine negotiations fell through fairly quickly and they had to find another director because they wanted to have the film in a similar slot 2 years later. So I'm thinking that this is a very kind of typical Hollywood sequel rush production thing going on.
Yes.
The screenplay for Die Hard 2 was co-written by Stephen E. D'Souza. He's the holdover from the previous film. And this seems to be a tradition in the Die Hard films, which A Good Day to Die Hard is the odd one out because ironically, even though it's the absolute worst Die Hard film, it's the only film that was written to be a Die Hard film or wasn't based off any non-related material. All the other films are based off non-related material. I mean, Die Hard 4 is based off some sort of news article or something. And obviously, Die with a Vengeance was a completely different film called Simon Says.
Yes.
But anyway, the second Die Hard was based on the novel 58 Minutes, which was published in 1987 and was written by a guy called Walter Wager or Wager. I think it's Wager. But the central plot of that is a guy where terrorists take over the airport. His wife is in a plane above and he's only got 58 minutes to get her down before the fuel runs out. And that's the general premise of the plot, which is pretty much repeated verbatim. I think the main difference that they had is obviously changing the character to McClane. And I think they did quite a lot of work on who the villains were. I think that was the main change that they made was the context of the villains and what they were actually doing.
Do you have any information on like the changeover between John McTiernan and Rennie Harlin? I mean, how did Rennie Harlin come to be involved in this film?
So Rennie Harlin was hired. I think they must have been looking at up-and-coming directors. And I think Rennie Harlin had been making some waves because prior to this, he was involved for about a year on Alien 3.
Yeah.
And had to drop out of that. Also, he was responsible for directing Nightmare on Elm Street 4, which was the most successful of all of the Elm Street films, I think.
Yeah, financially so.
Yeah, and he'd made this film called The Adventures of Ford Fairlane, which is a strange caper starring Andrew Dice Clay.
I've never gotten the appeal of Andrew Dice Clay, to be honest.
No. But they'd seen the dailies, so he was actually making this film when they were considering him. So they hired him based on that. And obviously, whatever, all the things he'd done previously, which wasn't very much.
No.
This is still kind of a situation where, like we get now, where you get directors who make really small films and then they get picked up to do this huge tentpole film because they can be a bit more controllable, I think.
I also think, I wonder if the Alien 3 development, because he was on that film for a significant amount of time. And I remember that he did want it to be very action-orientated as well. I do believe he was involved with the William Gibson drafts and moving that on as well. So there's obviously a familiarity there with 20th Century Fox and Rennie Harlin. They clearly have some trust in him, and to have him on board for that version of Alien 3 for so long, that I think perhaps that's part of the reason as well. Just, that working relationship they already have, even if it hadn't bore any fruit so far.
Yeah, I think so. But also, it mustn't have been an easy decision because the way that it worked is that they wanted him immediately, which greatly impacted the post-production of the film he was currently working on. So it meant that he had a situation of handling the post-production on the previous film whilst making this film, and it meant that Die Hard 2 and Ford Fairlane were edited simultaneously, and both films were released about 2 weeks apart. So we had two films come out pretty much at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the other one is very much forgotten, and I think it's only got about 28% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it's obviously not a great film or anything. But it might have been impacted by this film because they had no time for the post-production on it.
Well, I know reshoots weren't a massive thing back then, but they still happened. People still got pickup shots and things like that to re-record. I imagine this impacted that whole side of things completely.
Yeah, this definitely was a rush production because if you look at the dates, they shot this film from, I think it started on the 28th of November 1989.
Oh wow, yes.
And then they finished around mid-April 1990, and it comes out in like July. So when it did come out, it was described as a wet print, which is what they term for films that have been barely completed before going on to release.
Like Sergei Eisenstein working in the studio next door, cutting the film that's being shown in the theatre that's next door at the same time.
So I think it's a testament that it's as good as it is, actually, considering the very short turnaround and compromise that they must have had to have made.
To be honest, Die Hard 2, Die Harder, is a film that I would describe as good enough. Yeah. It's one of those. I completely understand the circumstances in which it was made. It wasn't ever going to be a great film like its predecessor, just because of what they wanted the film to act as well. My issue is that they try and turn it into an event film. Like every couple of years we're going to get another Christmas-based Die Hard film with John McClane in some other wacky situation.
Yeah,
and I'm kind of glad that didn't happen. Because for a moment there, it certainly looked like it was going to. But I would say even with all of that taken on board, and it's kind of, you do feel like it's just ticking the boxes of what they want a Die Hard film to be.
Yeah.
I do think it's still just about good enough for me.
Yeah. It's a strange one because I think making a Die Hard sequel is a double-edged sword anyway, because really Die Hard is a film that doesn't need any sequels. It's very much self-contained and you can just leave it there. And I think the problem they had, and the thing I appreciated with this one, is that they didn't try to completely recreate the first one. It's very much a sequel that expands, but in expanding, you do lose a lot of what made the original very special, which is obviously the claustrophobia and also the relationship between the villain and the hero via radio, because he has very little interaction with anybody in that film.
Yeah.
And it's all done over radio and stuff. So it is a very unique setup for an action film. And whenever you try and make a sequel to that, and try and recreate that, then you're going to be accused of just ripping off the old film.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate that they tried to do something completely different with this one, but again, it just becomes a more standard action film because of it.
That's it, yeah. I agree with you as well, because I like that with this one, as you mentioned, it's not just John McClane on his own against the villains again, although it does often end with him in that situation.
Yeah.
But he's still in contact with people face to face. There are reoccurring characters that he brushes up against and that type of thing. My issue with that whole side of things is, yes, you do lose the claustrophobia, and I'm okay losing that if there was a sense of immediacy about the situation. Like, there's this whole thing with the planes being in the sky, and they do illustrate that, terrible things can happen if the villains get their way, with Windsor Airlines crashing. But in a very, very mean and nasty way, they illustrate that people can die here if John McClane doesn't defeat these villains. However, despite this, there's never any real sense of, immediacy. There's a moment later on in the film where John McClane's just kind of sat on the stairs, just looking a bit defeated after the plane crash, and somebody comes up and says, we've only got an hour of fuel left until your wife's plane, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And everybody goes, okay. So, better do something then, I suppose. And
they really stretch out the planes flying above, don't they?
Yeah, and nobody on the plane gives a shit. Really,
No,
to be
not
honest.
until right towards the end.
Yeah. If it had a sense of urgency, kinetic energy to it, like everything was moving on to the next thing, like in a powerful kinetic way, and the villains were more involved in that, I think this whole thing would have worked more and still could have been different as well.
Yeah, and it's strange that there isn't that, because on the basis of what the novel's called and the setup of the novel, it does seem very much time-based.
Yes,
considering it's called 58 minutes.
Exactly.
I mean, I've not read the book, but I imagine it's very much...
It's 600 pages long.
Yeah, but I imagine the book is much more of a race against time than the film is.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So yeah, that is something that definitely takes a back seat. I think the main problem with the film, really, I mean, if you boil it down to, is they decided to blow everything up, expand everything out, but I think they went too big because there's just far too many characters. And I think that helps to slow the film's pacing up, because he's dealing with so many different people. And there's just characters coming in left, right, and centre. Just think how many villains there are.
Well, I've written as well in regards to the villains. I've said it's actually an embarrassment of riches when it comes to the actors that they have involved for supporting characters. I mean, these are people like Robert Patrick, obviously, is the one that stands out. But then again, you've got William Sadler as the main bad guy. You've got Franco Nero as
Esperanza.
Yeah, Esperanza. Was it Valverde, that made-up place that they use in all of these films?
It's the same one they use in The Commando, because it's the same writer and the same producer. So
that's it, yeah. But none of them really make an impact.
You cut John Leguizamo for one shot.
Exactly. I'm Robert Patrick for one line before he gets shot as well. And these are actors that we know have presence. They can have presence if they're allowed their own space within a film. But they're just there, as you say, deliver one line, get shot, cannon fodder.
Yeah.
There's just too much of that going on. And I think about Die Hard. The thing is, I know you mentioned that there are too many characters, and I do agree with you. I think there are too many characters, but I think Die Hard is chock full of characters. But even the terrorists themselves, there are some that are there for one line or two lines, or even just a look. But I know who all of those terrorist characters are.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think just the lack of impact or individuality between these.
Yeah.
I guess it's because the military as well, the kind of nondescript military people.
Yeah. There's a lot of ally characters as well, so...
Oh, yeah.
And I think it's just down to the airport setting, because, you would have lots of different people in charge in an airport, but you just don't get that feeling that they're on their own, because in the original Die Hard, you're so up against it because all the other allies are captured. Argyle is out of action because he can't hear anything. He's just rocking downstairs with his limousine.
You know what? People die that day, and Argyle is having the time of his life.
I want to watch that film. Why don't they make a Die Hard film which is just about Argyle and his day?
Yeah, just him and that massive teddy bear. It can be like a buddy cop film.
Yeah. The climax is when he rams into the van.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But the beauty of the original one is it's that relationship between McClane and Powell over the radio. And
Yeah.
you've got Powell as very much out of his depth as a police officer. And then you get all the special forces coming on later and fucking it up.
My favourite shot, this is what I mean about giving these characters character, and this is pure John McTiernan, but my favourite shot is of one of the SWAT team moving in, and as they're walking through the thorn bush, he pricks his finger on a thorn and goes, ow! It's like perfect.
Yeah.
That already, straight away, in just that one little moment, you've just summed up those individuals as characters. It's brilliant.
Yeah. This film doesn't really have enough of that. There is potential for that to happen.
Yeah.
But I think it's more in the director than the script, because I think a lot of those things would have been put in by John McTiernan on set. It doesn't have the wit of the original.
Yeah.
I think that's the main thing that's missing. Because even in like the one-liners and stuff, they're just nowhere near as good.
I've written one down, and it says, what sets off the metal detector first? The lead in your ass or the shit in your brains? How does that even make sense as a line?
That's the thing.
Shit doesn't set off metal detectors. What are you eating if your shit sets off a metal detector?
That's like a Biff Tannen line.
It really is.
Make like a tree and get out of here.
Get out of here.
Yeah. Oh, there's some fucking awful lines in this as well. Like, I've got a great one towards the start. Oh, yeah. This is a tag team?
oh, yeah.
During the luggage sequence.
It's got loads of little bits like that where John McClane, he feels believable in Die Hard 1. And in this, he's leaning more towards cartoon character, like caricature of that. I think it is because they, as you say, you've just hit the nail on the head for me, which is it doesn't have the wit.
No.
To sell it, really.
Yeah, it becomes more of an approximation
Yeah.
of the original character as well. I mean, that it gets chipped away in each subsequent film, really. It kind of comes back a little bit more in the third one, I think mainly because John McTiernan's in charge.
Yeah, I mean, I like Die Hard 2, and I like this trilogy. I can see it as a trilogy, but Die Hard with a Vengeance is the only film in this series for me that feels like a sequel to Die Hard.
Yeah.
Truly,
Yeah.
it takes the character from that film and moves him on and does something different, but also feels very John McClane. I want to very briefly just talk about this because we're really using this episode as a way to talk about the Die Hard series in general. But when Die Hard with a Vengeance came out, I absolutely adored that film. I do think it tapers off in the final act. It's clear that they had some issues with that,
Yeah.
and it obviously came to light later just how against the wire they were with shooting that as well. But for me, I was actually quite shocked years later to find out that Die Hard with a Vengeance wasn't that well regarded as a Die Hard film as well. I still am, to be honest. It's, for me, at least half of it is pure brilliance, and it does start to taper away at the end, but it still completely works for me. It's still like 4 out of 5 film for me. Solid 4 out of 5 film for me. I mean, how do you feel about Die Hard with a Vengeance? I know I've just like enthused massively about it, but how do you feel about it?
Oh,
as
yeah,
well?
definitely. I mean, it baffled me, isn't it? Got like a 50-odd% rating.
Yeah, something like that.
And it's much worse reviewed than the fourth one. And I'm like, what the fuck? Seriously? That's...
Holy shit, 59%. You're absolutely right.
But it's strange because when people talk about it, they do talk about it affectionately. Oh, yeah, it's the one with Sam Jackson in it. You know, it's like...
Yeah.
The main issue is that they filmed an ending that didn't work and they had to go back, and it does suffer quite significantly at the end because of that. And the ending does feel tacked on.
Yeah, the last 10 minutes don't work, but I think it's one of those, we've spoken about it on the podcast before, and I know that there is that specific study about films with endings that don't work and films with endings that do work. It doesn't matter really what has come before or how much you've enjoyed it. If the last 10 minutes of a film don't work for you, you're more likely to give it a completely negative review.
But yeah, going back to Die Hard 2, even though Die with a Vengeance is probably a better sequel to the original Die Hard, I do like the fact that in this film, they try very hard to stick to the aesthetics of the first one.
Yeah.
I do like the cinematography because I do feel they've kind of, even though it's a different DP, it's Oliver Wood this time, who would become more known for doing the Bourne films later on.
Yeah.
I think he really does successfully recapture the feeling of the Jan de Bont photography from the first one. Even though it's not the most exciting thing in terms of what it does with its villains, and it's very stock in places, and it's very much more of a standard action movie, albeit a big budget one, it is a very well-made film.
Yes, yeah, I would agree.
I can't fault it in terms of its technical aspects.
Well, that's what I mean. I think even as a studio picture, even as a franchise film, I think it's very competently made. And because of that cinematography as well, because of the look that they've gone for, because we mentioned Live Free or Die Hard being this type of film as well, like just a competent action film that doesn't do anything special, but just about works and then falls apart at the end. With Die Hard 2, I think because of the cinematography, it kind of lends it an authenticity within this series that film doesn't have, the Live Free or Die Hard doesn't have. And obviously because the character feels more authentic, even if he's not as witty as he was before. I will say I completely agree with you on that front up until just a point, which is, although on a large scale the action does for the most part work, I think it's missing the consequence of violence that John McTiernan always pushes across in his films.
Yeah.
There's a lack of impact. And sometimes, like, for example, the fight with John McClane and one of the soldiers outside in the snow when he picks up the icicle and stabs him in the eye, which is a great death. I love that death.
Yeah.
But the fight itself, you can see that they're trying to make it into the equivalent of the fight between, what's his name, in Die Hard 1, the blonde-haired terrorist who's the brother of... everybody knows the one I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, the guys in Living Daylights.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
They try and do it as, like, a moment like that, but the shot is just so static, and they're just kind of rolling about on the ground. There's no... I feel like it's missing moments like that. However, as I say, it does still hit the right boxes at the right times with, like, the deaths is great. Like, I love that. Like I say, that icicle through the eye really, really redeems that whole section for me.
Even though it's very competently made, I think there's, in the way it's been directed and even written, it really does lack tension at times because it doesn't really ramp it up. And the sequence that I have the biggest issue with is the very first action sequence, which is the sequence in the luggage conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Because it occurs just way too soon in the film. It's like 13 minutes in or something. And the tension hasn't been ramped up enough yet.
No.
With a film like this, you really need like the gears to get into motion in terms of the villain's plan and get it locked in.
Yeah.
And have John McClane be unaware of be aware, but more on the peripherals and allow things to lock in and get moving.
He's already onto them before they've even, like...
started,
solidified their place and taken control.
Yeah, it's a bit too soon.
It is, and I do like as well, in those first, 13 minutes, the introductions, everybody gets an introduction into the film. I like the way it does introduce some of its characters. But then, apart, talking about introducing some of its characters,
we're not only introduced to characters, we're introduced to characters' body parts as well.
Yes, exactly.
They have their own separate introduction.
Yeah, so I watched it with Ali yesterday as well, and I was sure to rewind and pause it and say, I was like, it was like the Zapruder film for me. I was like, there's his ball bag. Look, can't you see it? It's his ball bag.
I was saying this to Jess, and it's like, how the fuck do you know? The thing that just guys just talk about when we talk about the Die Hard films. Like, do you remember when you see Thingy's ball bag in it? And it's like, yeah.
But she was like, I can't see it. And I'm like, there it is. Are you blind?
It's the stories that guys tell over campfires.
It really is, yeah. Gather round, children.
Do you remember the story of William Sadler's ball bag?
Billy Ballbag, his friends killed him.
Billy Ballbag. Oh, dear.
Yeah, but what an introduction.
Yeah.
Certainly a memorable one.
Yeah, that's a Rennie Harlin special.
Yeah.
That one. That was his idea.
He is a bit of a weirdo. He does have he has a thing like Quentin Tarantino where he's all about the feet.
Well, he is from Finland, so...
How do you feel about Rennie Harlin? Because I will say as well, just speaking about him as a director, he's one that is laughed at quite significantly. But I have a softness for Rennie Harlin, and I don't think he's the best director or best action director in the world. But I don't know, I think of like The Long Kiss Goodnight works for me, and Deep Blue Sea works for me.
I think I was one of the only people that actually went to see Cutthroat Island at the cinema.
I've still never seen it.
Have you not? I actually went to the cinema to see that film. I'm one of the 20 people that went to see it in Britain, I imagine.
How often is it that we're on the opposite sides of this?
Yeah.
That you went to the cinema to see a film that nobody saw?
Yeah.
Because I remember Cutthroat Island coming out, and I do remember actually, even around that time, there was, I wouldn't say hype for it, but they were certainly trying to drum up publicity. It was in the magazines I was reading, it was on the TV, and then nobody saw it. I remember wanting to see it and then just not seeing it. Like every single other person but you.
Yeah.
How was it? What was it like?
It's all right.
Is it Popcorn Digest worthy?
Oh, definitely, yeah, definitely. To be honest, I've not actually seen it since that first viewing at the cinema.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine it had a great impact on me, considering I never actually went to watch it again.
Yeah.
I don't remember it being terrible, but I was only like 8 years old when I saw that film. So
Exactly, yeah.
you know, I was 8 years old watching a film with parrots in, so it's going to please me whatever.
It's where your fetish was born. And, yar. But yes, moving back to the world of Die Hard 2, Die Harder. Yes, let's talk about William Sadler for a moment now that we've talked about his balls. Let's now talk about his character. So, we spoke about this when we were covering the Bill and Ted.
Yeah.
Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. And I really think it's worth talking about now. But William Sadler, love the guy. One of my favourite actors. Absolutely love him in everything that he does, even if it's bad. Mm-hmm. And I would say, though, that this is one of his weaker performances, and I don't think it's his fault. I think a lot of this comes down to the directing and the writing.
Yeah.
But I feel like he is a guy that can play big characters. He's a guy that has a lot of presence and a lot of charisma. And he doesn't really display any of it or is given the opportunity to do so in this. I think it's the whole, like, because they've gone down this road of them being military exiles, they're all based in order and regime. But they don't really have any presence because of that, because they're all so very strict. I'm not saying that they all need to be Hans Gruber level of like flamboyant or flamboyancy, but I still want to have something, like even if it's menace, I want more menace, more theatricality in that menace as well.
Yeah, I know William Sadler's gone on record for saying that the scene in which he's impersonating someone from the tower and bringing the Windsor aircraft down is his favourite sequence, because he was allowed to be a bit more theatrical because he's
the best
impersonating somebody. And there should have been way more of that, because with an actor like William Sadler, you could have made a villain that was just as compelling as Hans Gruber.
Yeah, he's certainly the actor that could sell that completely.
But yeah, it's all been toned down and stripped back to this sort of stock military type that he's had to play, and you know, he's good at playing it.
Yeah.
It's not very interesting.
And that's it. I 100% don't believe that it's anything that William Sadler is doing. What I feel like when I watch it is that from a filmmaking point of view, they're scared of competing with Hans Gruber and failing. So much so that they've gone too far in the other direction. And I think, yes, sure, I absolutely agree that after Hans Gruber, the right idea is to do something different. But that doesn't mean that you need to neuter your character to this point. And I feel like they've just been too scared that those comparisons are going to come up. But as a result, that character doesn't make an impact, really.
Yeah, and it's strange as well, because going back to his ball bag, how they set him up is be this kind of weird-ass character, and they don't play on that at all.
Yeah, if he's like regimented, I want to see him like evil eyes, kind of crazed. Yeah. He's got wacky ideas.
You're expecting him, following that intro scene, for him to start doing some weird moves on his people when he gets pissed off. But it never happens.
And the fight as well, because they introduce him that way, you're waiting for that fight. And when it does eventually come with John McClane, it's on the wing of a plane, so you can't really do much with that.
No.
I think there needed to be like a real one-on-one, drawn-out, layered fight sequence between them where John McClane's just getting his ass handed to him, much like in Die Hard, but like he's getting his ass handed to him and has to think his way out of this situation.
Yeah.
Whilst taking the beating of his life.
Yeah. I like the fight on the plane wing, but yeah, because it's on the plane wing and it's moving, there's only so much that they can do.
Exactly, yeah. I have no issue with it culminating with a fight on a plane wing.
In fact, the ending of the film, I would say it probably wins the award for being the second best climax of the series.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Because even though With a Vengeance is a better film, it falls down in its climax. Whereas obviously you can't beat the climax of the original, but it definitely comes second, I think.
Well, I would say that it shares something in common with the original as well, in that whereas the original ends with everybody's favourite character, you know, what's his name, Powell, like his whole arc in that film is learning to shoot people again, and like that's his arc. He's a cop that perhaps shouldn't have a gun because he shot a kid. So perhaps that's the right thing for him not to have a gun.
Yeah.
And it ends with him finally overcoming his fears and murdering a son of a bitch.
Yeah. I was thinking about this earlier, and I would say Die Hard is a perfect film apart from that last minute.
I was literally going to say the same thing to you that I've written in my notes. That Die Hard is a perfect film, but 1 point.
Yeah, because I'm not adverse to having that kind of false ending, but I think it's the way that it's played that makes it problematic for me. And it's not just problematic because of the implications of it, as you just described. It's kind of also problematic because it over-sentimentalizes it as well, like in the way that it's shot with all the slow-mo and things and the kind of music that they use. And it's like, it's very 80s.
It really
really dates the film because it's like, it's very much, you're in sort of Back to the Future territory in terms of 80s-ness.
That's it, yeah.
And that'll be the only thing I would have done differently.
If I remember rightly as well, they use a cue from Aliens for that moment. It's a James Horner cue because I believe Michael Kamen and John McTiernan had a bit of a falling out whilst making the music for Die Hard, even though he did come back to do With a Vengeance. They had a little bit of a tiff for that moment of the film because John McTiernan ended up using the temp track, which was from Aliens.
Ah, the dreaded temp track.
Exactly, yeah. But much like that, because it has that moment that is tone deaf, I like that Die Hard 2 also has its own moment that's tone deaf, where it kind of ends with everybody being really, happy and Let It Snow starting and stuff like that, and the camera's like really pulling away, and nobody mentions the fact that an hour ago a plane full of 100 or so English people just fucking nosedived into
It's all right, they're English people.
Maybe a few hundred meters from here.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, come and just warm your hands over this burning carcass over here.
That sequence is so well executed in the moment that it is, but then it's just completely forgotten about 10 minutes later.
Yeah, it is.
It's quite funny.
It does it so well with establishing that doll as well. Like having the kid with the doll on the plane and then having John McClane pick it up out of the wreckage. So it's very strange that immediately after, I think they've gone, oh, this is a bit dark. Let's just pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's Christmas.
I know that the air industry did not like this film whatsoever.
Oh, shocker!
Yeah. And that's also the reason why all the airlines are fictitious. There's no real airlines in this film.
Yeah. I mean, who would want their name attached to this film just as like a little reminder that...
British Airways.
I would say this is what the film does right. I like these type of films that do it. Now, if you're in the know, you're going to see through the ideas that this film presents. But I know that there's a lot of people within, aviation and that type of thing that say, actually, this wouldn't work if it was to happen. We would still be able to land the planes via other means that we have on board our crafts. And I'm like, I completely understand that. But I think that this film sells that idea, as unfeasible as it is, to a layman like me. It sells it really quite well.
Yeah.
Like I say, my only thing is I just wish there was more tension and urgency with it.
Yeah.
We forgot to mention as well that talking about Windsor Airlines, it's piloted by everyone's favorite enterprise officer, Cole Meany.
Yeah.
I don't know why he just didn't transport everyone out of there.
Yeah, I mean, the sequence is great apart from the portrayal of anybody English. It's just fucking horrendous.
Tea and crumpets.
Yeah, it's properly like an American's view of what English people are, and they fuck it up so badly.
Yeah.
It's like borderline racist because it's that bad.
That said, I have heard people say about our podcast, some of our American listeners, that when we say bits and bobs, it makes them feel very British indeed.
Haberdashery. Yeah, there are quite a few leaps of faith technically with this film, like you were saying before, and the big one is the film's climax, because I was reading before that the whole gag of the fuel dump, and then John McClane setting light to that wouldn't happen because apparently jet fuel has a much lower flash point than gasoline. If you did that, it wouldn't set alight.
Oh, right.
I think it takes an incredible amount of heat to ignite it, which probably is why they use it for planes.
I was about to say, that's probably why it's used for planes.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, the whole end part of this It's one of those kind of like Mythbusters things, isn't it? Like the whole end of this film is debunked.
To be honest, you say the whole end of this film, I think you could probably debunk the whole beginning and middle as well.
Yeah.
I just don't have the knowledge to do so.
Yeah.
There's a whole section of this film that we haven't actually discussed yet.
No.
And that is the whole subplot involving Holly and Richard Thornburg, Dick Thornburg, the reporter from the first film. What's your opinion of that, Andy, would you say? Because I have thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense for Holly being there because, one, it's obviously part of the original novel that it was based on, so that's something they've taken from the novel, so that's fine. And also it makes sense that he would be waiting for her to arrive. Like, that whole setup is fine.
Yeah.
But the fact that they have Dick Thornburg on there as well.
That's the point at which I'm broken on that.
Yeah, it's very forced to have young Donald Trump on the plane.
Yeah, I would say, like, for everything that it puts across, and the film does keep on reminding us of this whole thing in a very kind of scriptwriter winking at us kind of way of, like, how can the same shit happen to the same guy twice?
I've done this before.
Yeah, exactly. But I buy it. I buy it for John McClane to be there if Holly's on the plane. But the thing that breaks that whole aspect of the film for me is Dick Thornburg being there too. That's the point in which the whole setup breaks for me. He shouldn't. We don't really need him there. I get that there's something for Holly to do on the plane, but he's the bit that I don't get. I don't buy it. And because I don't buy that, everything else starts to falter because of it.
It's the bit that just shouts, "We're in a sequel. I'm here in sequel mode. All your favorite characters again."
Well, I wrote down that it does have that feeling that a lot of things are doing now, where it's like a TV reunion special.
Yeah.
Where it's like, we have all of your favorite characters back, and including, a fucking Twinkie.
Oh, man. I'm going to say that Sergeant Al Powell is sponsored by Hostess. They're really getting that product placement in there. I mean, that's another story, isn't it? That's the famous Black & Decker story, where Black & Decker sued Die Hard 2.
Oh, you've got to tell me this, because I need to know about it. I don't know the Black & Decker story.
Yeah, they tried to sue him for about $150,000 or something, because apparently, it was a product placement deal. I don't think any money has exchanged hands, but basically there was a scene in the film that they cut out, which John McClane uses a Black & Decker drill to drill holes in something to get into a vent pipe or something like that. And they cut the scene, but Black & Decker had invested a lot of money in tie-ins. So when they discovered that the scene wasn't in the film, they tried to sue the Fox or somebody for breaching their contract, even though there was nothing. I don't think it didn't go anywhere because apparently no money had changed hands in terms of them being able to use the Black & Decker brand or anything like that. So,
right, got you.
But it's just a famous thing that...
Oh, right. No, I didn't
famous
know
product
about that.
placement case.
Wow, it's not often you get a film of this type refusing to use a product for placement in a film.
Yeah.
Normally it's more like come one, come all.
Yeah, there's plenty of product placement in this film if you look out for it, though.
There's plenty of like watches being put on display as well. There's a few close-ups of like watches.
And was it Pacific Bell?
Oh yeah,
telephones, even though they only service California, even though it's supposed to be Washington, because that big atrium, it's actually a terminal. I've actually been to it. It's actually a terminal in LAX.
Oh really?
I've got it written down actually. What it is?
That makes sense.
It's Tom Bradley Terminal.
And
then other parts of it doubled, and then that's Stapleton, and then just a fuckload of model work, which some of it I didn't even realize was model work. It's that good.
You know what I've just thought of? I mentioned before that I said it's like a TV reunion special in terms of like the characters coming back, but actually this is a very localized reference for us.
Yeah,
it's actually more like a Red Nose Day reunion special.
Yeah. It really is.
It's got really that feeling.
Yeah, it's like that when they do those Richard Curtis reunion mini films.
Exactly.
Like the Love Actually one and the For Weddings and a Funeral one. Yeah, it really is like that. The weirdest one is the Al Powell one, though, because he gets such high billing for what is like 2 minutes of screen time. Of which a minute of that is just eating a Twinkie.
It's an easy pay job, that one.
Yeah, you get free Twinkies.
I like as well that Bruce Willis is flirting with the receptionist, and like he's got like a busted open eye, he's got scabs all over his hands. he's on the phone, and she's just like always batting her eyelids at him.
Oh, yeah, it's very 80s.
Yeah, and she's only getting like half the conversation as well, but she's still like laughing at his one-liners. Like he's on the phone and it's like just silence, and then she hears him say, "Yeah, they put too much chlorine in the pool," and she's like, like, "You didn't hear the setup."
Yeah.
The bit where she flirts with him and says, "Do you want to go get something to eat?" I feel like it's a bit like massaging Bruce Willis's ego a little bit there.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm not saying that Bruce Willis isn't without his sexual charisma and chemistry on screen during these times. Man, what happened to Bruce Willis? Even watching this film, what happened to Bruce Willis? I remembered a couple of years ago, I watched 12 Monkeys, and it made me cry. And it wasn't specifically anything that was sad in the film. It was a moment in which Bruce Willis is in a car and he's talking about how bad it is in the future and how wonderful it is now, and he's crying, he's listening to the radio, he's going through the radio as well, and he's kind of like playing about with everything, and it made me realize, like, oh man, what happened to this version of Bruce Willis? And I got a little bit teary-eyed. I was thinking, this guy could act, and he was like the real deal. He had everything. He had like the charisma, but also he could be an action hero, but he could also do drama. He had real acting chops as well. And somewhere along the line, he just stopped caring. He stopped pushing himself. I think the last film that he ever did anything was Looper.
Yeah, I think he does sometimes try with it's like a independent production. Like I'm thinking like Moonrise
Wes
Kingdom
Anderson.
or something like that. Yeah, something.
yeah.
But if it's anything like just like actiony, I'm trying to think. Has he done anything big budget recently? I can't.
He came back for Glass, and even in that, he's not terrible in it, but he's still just, he's not doing anything in it to push himself, and to a point in which I think there's a decision made during the making of that film to start marginalizing his character. Yeah. And you can see that like there's action sequences in that film, and it only has very little action, but there's sequences in that film where it's clearly a body double because Bruce Willis wasn't going to be there for that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to do a bit more reading into why that is, but he's just done endless streams of direct-to-DVD fodder, and it's just fucking terrible.
Yeah, films where he's clearly being like shot over a weekend.
Yeah.
All of his stuff, and he's not in shot with anybody else, and everything else is a bold double.
And it's not even at the Nicolas Cage caliber either, because at least Nicolas Cage throws in a quirky performance or something like that, whereas Bruce Willis is just fucking boring.
It does make me think maybe there's some sort of like tax reasoning or something like that, like he has to be in stuff. It's not just a matter of holding out for the good films. He's just having to be in film after film after film.
There's something in that.
But like you say, Nicolas Cage, at least he's still doing it in a way in which he's like, well, you know what, I have to do these terrible, terrible films one after the other, but I'm going to do them in a way in which I'm getting something out of them as well. So they're going to be fucking wild. And I read an interview with him, and he's very upfront. He knows about what type of film he's making, but he's like, from what Nicolas Cage says, every film that he approaches, no matter what it is, it's still a film. It's still a paid job. And I'm still going to give it a performance because that's what people are paying me for. And it's like, you're not just getting the Nicolas Cage name.
Yeah.
I like Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
Started off as a conversation about Bruce Willis, and it ended with me saying, I like Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
It says everything.
But it's a strange thing with the characters in this film, especially the returning ones, because some of them shouldn't be there, but at the same time, I do like that they're there. It's really forced, but I do like that Thornburg subplot because it just further reinforces what a fucking knob he is.
Yeah.
I just like that aspect of him chasing a story, and him the one causing the panic. Him getting tasered is quite amusing as well. So it's not all bad, even though it really shouldn't be there.
It shouldn't be there, but I will say that they do make it successfully part of the plot in a way that isn't too forced. In that, obviously, he's got a sound guy on the plane that can listen in on the cockpit comms, and then that's how they discover that there's terrorists that have overtaken the airport, and it's through Dick that actually that information is leaked back to the terrorists, that everybody's in know of this, that everybody's in conversation with each other. Also, man, Holly is sat next to a very crazed old woman that likes to taser her dog. That's really something.
That's like a old woman written by Shane Black kind of thing.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, dear. I'm just trying to think of these other characters because some of the new characters are very cartoony. Obviously, the biggie is Carmine Lorenzo.
Oh,
who
God,
I think
yeah.
we need to talk about because he is action movie captain.
He really is. He's like, I want your badge.
Yeah. He really should be making an appearance in Last Action Hero. Like, he's that cliched.
Yeah. Smoke coming out of his ears.
Yeah.
No, oh God, absolutely. And to be honest, I don't know why. In my mind, I'd gotten the actors and characters mixed up between his cousin that's supposed to have given him the ticket at the beginning, who's Joey's dad from Friends.
Joey's dad, yeah.
Yeah. So for some reason, I'd got those actors mixed up in my head as well. But yeah, it has certainly one too many of them. But that, what's his name, Lorenzo character, the chief. The chief of the airport. Obviously, he is a cardboard cutout, but also I think he swears too much in a way in which it's the writers, as you mentioned, the lack of wit. So they're just throwing in F words as many times as they can to try and make what he's saying more impactful because he's not really saying anything that's too interesting. So it's like, just make him angry and swear a lot is kind of his whole shtick.
Yeah, you can tell that the script probably needed another pass by
Shane Black.
To do something. It definitely lacks wit. I mean, from the first scene onwards, I mean, like, John McClane's retort at having his car pulled away is son of a bitch. That's a proper placeholder line.
Yeah.
That probably should have been rewritten at some point, and they haven't had time to do it. So, yeah, the whole film is very much like that. It does have its moments, but there are just too many times where you're waiting for some really witty line that doesn't come. And
you've also got that weird character that's in the in with
Marvin.
the ventilation. Yeah, Marvin, yeah.
Yeah, he's a bit of a weirdo, isn't he?
Does he live down there? Some sort of subterranean mole person.
Yeah, he's definitely got some kids captive somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find him very unnerving, actually.
100%. Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. He's definitely a Stephen King creation, isn't he?
Yeah. Definitely.
But yeah, man, so many characters.
I think the thing that muddies the waters slightly, and obviously they're thinking it's a really clever twist, but you've got Colonel Stewart and his gang, Esperanza on the plane that they keep cutting back to, which feels very disconnected from whatever else is going on.
Yeah.
And then they pile on all these sort of, was it General Grant?
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
And his crew that they obviously think's a really clever twist and everything, which doesn't really hold water for me because I don't know how, if they're calling the Marines or whatever, that particular platoon is the one that they're going to pick. Everything hinges on that as well.
I was about to say, because it does feel like it hinges on it, like the whole plot. It also hinges on there being a storm at the time in which this character's being transported as well.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I wanted to mention, in which there's so much coincidence in the setup as well. Like, it's so lucky for them that there's this fucking crazy storm, worse than anybody's seen for a while.
Yeah.
At the same time, which is exactly what the terrorists need. I'm glad you've mentioned it because this is something I wanted to go over. I don't actually get the relationships between these characters, all of the villains, these groups of villains. I don't know how this special unit that's been brought in, how they relate to William Sadler's unit. I know that those two, William Sadler was trained by Grant, but I don't know how they've been, flipped, essentially, the whole unit.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't feel like anyone's motivation is strong enough to pull off this whole scheme anyway. Feels very far-fetched to get this one guy.
Yeah.
And then think that they can just fuck off and have no one bother them. I mean, it is based on, real life stuff. Yeah, General Esperanza is based on the Panamanian General Manuel Noriega, who was overthrown for drug trafficking in the 80s. And also it's partly based on the Iran-Contra scandal in the mid-80s as well.
Yeah.
But their scheme is cool, but incredibly convoluted.
Yeah, really.
And it seems to have a lot of different parts to it that I don't understand. I get the whole them controlling the tower and stuff, but then everything else is kind of, it's like they thought that would work.
Yeah.
That they would just hand them the plane and they would be able to fly. Like, what happens when they fly off?
Yeah. They're not getting away.
No.
It's like, with the moment that they get in the air, they're like, so what next? He's like, well, I haven't thought this far.
It's not even as if they're in like Florida or something and they can get into like Cuban airspace or something.
Straight
it's
like that, yeah.
Yeah, they're in fucking Washington. You've got thousands of miles before you can get to any kind of safe haven. Yeah, the plot is so flawed in that way. It's cool when you're watching it, but then when you stop to think about it for 5 seconds, it doesn't really work.
Like you say, I like the whole taking over an airport thing and having the planes in the sky and holding them at ransom, essentially, really, by taking away their ability to land safely. I love that setup. That setup's absolutely fine. I feel that the motivation for doing so is all very, very wishy-washy and not really ever communicated in a way that's completely understandable to myself. But what I would also say is, of all of the parts I think that it should have copied Die Hard, I'm always a firm believer in trying something different, and this film tries enough different that I appreciate. But that is one thing that I wish it would have copied, is because Die Hard's villain's plot, Hans Gruber's plot, is very simple.
Yeah.
And it's something that's always changing, but we as an audience are always let in to know what the plot is, how it's developing, and then eventually what his real motivations are for doing so as well. That it's all money. Mm-hmm. I don't have that with these villains. I don't really know what the end game is.
Yeah. And also the fact in the original, they're clever enough to cover their tracks and make them think that they're dead.
That's what I mean. It's like, once they take off, what's the next step for you guys? Because it's not good.
Yeah. And I think this film's version of that is having that twist of the Grant character and his unit, and them thinking, oh yeah, there's actually another unit and they're all in on it and stuff. But I think they think it's a really clever twist. It is interesting. I do like how they, they do the blanks. Oh, that's another thing that is a debunked thing, that apparently those kind of guns, you wouldn't just be able to load blanks and live rounds that quickly because they're automatic weapons, so it wouldn't work like that. So they're very much stretching credibility with this plot.
To be honest as well, like whenever you see blanks used in any of these films, one thing that's always overlooked is the fact that blanks can kill you.
Yeah.
You're still firing something out the end of the gun as well. So if at a close enough range, a blank is going to kill you.
Mm. So yeah, when he's just shooting Lorenzo, it's like, yep, he's going to be like severely injured.
Yeah. I think one last thing for myself that I want to discuss is something that I feel like's never really gotten enough credit for the Die Hard films, and yet for me it's a massive part of its identity as a series. And again, this is just talking about the trilogy, but Michael Kamen's music.
Yeah.
I know that, as mentioned, there's a piece in Die Hard that is replaced by a piece from Aliens, James Horner music. But I actually think that Die Hard has a real strong musical identity. I think Die Hard 2 repeats too much of the first film's cues without really adding much new. There are no new elements really added apart from what it adds to the villain, but I don't think it makes much of an impact. I think Die Hard 3 has more of its own musical identity.
Yeah.
But I think Michael Kamen does solid work for this series. It doesn't get enough kudos.
I definitely prefer his scores for Die Hard than his Lethal Weapon scores. Because although I like them, they are incredibly cheesy. In a charming way, but they are like, especially with like the David Sanborn, like, kind of stuff. It's like... Yeah,
doing his Eric Clapton. To be honest, I'm not massive on the Lethal Weapon scores. They certainly are iconic for what they represent and for that type of film, for the buddy action cop movie. But yeah, they're not scores that I really revisit just because of purely how cheesy they are.
Yeah,
But yeah, Die Hard for me. Yeah, it sounds good, and it's a shame that Michael Kamen really never got his kudos for that.
Yeah. I was going to say, it looks good as well. I was just thinking that the other thing I wanted to mention is the special effects in this film. These are done by ILM.
Yeah.
Taking over from Boss Films, who did the original. And I think the plane effects and everything and all the models in this film are great.
Yeah.
It does actually feature the first all-digital composite shot at the end, which is the last shot in the film.
But yeah, I noticed about that composite as well, that for the time, it looks really quite accomplished because there are so many moving parts of that final matte painting as well. It's clearly not just a singular matte because you've got people moving throughout it as well. You've got like static elements, but you got people like moving throughout it, and I thought it looks actually quite accomplished. And to find out as well that it was a fully digital composite, that is, it's a little moment in film history.
It's very well executed, especially when you compare it to something like Air Force One, which is also dealing with planes. But with Die Hard 2, you're dealing with miniatures at its zenith, whereas with something like Air Force One, you're dealing with them trying out CGI, but it's very much in its infancy.
Yeah.
And the difference is quite profound. I mean, that's the real Achilles heel of that film, is its effects work.
That part really falls apart.
It does.
That film.
Yeah.
It's a Wolfgang Petersen film as well. And his films traditionally look really good. But even in the way in which that CGI plane is shot is really bad as well.
Yeah, it's not
It's like
good.
everything falls apart for that moment. It's clear that nobody felt comfortable doing that or knew quite how to present it in a digital way.
No. There's large sections of the airport shots which are entirely models.
Yeah.
All the stuff with the, was it the Skywalk and any shot of the tower. Yeah. I was watching a documentary earlier about that, and apparently they needed to give the effect of something moving on the top of the tower. So what the guy did, somebody made a model of a striptease model and then just stuck it up, and it's on like a little roundabout thing, and it's just that's going around up in the top. I think the most famous shot out of the whole film, which is something that I knew about long before I saw the film, is the ejector seat shot.
Yeah, right. I mean, that was on like every advert.
Yeah.
And the poster as well. I remember the fire behind him and the ejector seat up at the camera.
Yeah, it's definitely the most iconic part of this film.
Yeah.
Because I think I had it in a special effects book. They had a whole section on how they did that and everything. So
it looks really good as well.
Oh, yeah, it does, yeah. There's one thing I wanted to ask you, whether you'd seen, it's a very famous thing, that shortly after its theatrical run, it ran on, I think, a station called TBS.
Is this the dubbed version?
The dubbed version. In order to get like a clean version, they did a dub, but completely fucked it up.
There's a few films out there that have got really famous dubs, and this one is one of them.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's supposed to be... I've not seen anything of it.
Have you not seen... Oh, I watched some of it this morning.
I know it's on YouTube, and I've read about it.
It's hilarious.
I've read some of the things that they're supposed to say, but I've not seen the video yet. But yeah, it's like one of the most famous bad dubs.
Yeah.
But there's a whole host of really bad TV dubs. We don't really get that anymore, do we?
No.
In the 90s, because films were moving on to TV at such greater speed as well, and the rules for television was so remarkably different than what it was for film at the cinema, that you had all of these films, all of these action films with crazy dubs. And I kind of wish we still lived in that world.
Yeah, but it's so ridiculously amateurish. I mean, even the sound goes down a bit when there's new lines as well, and it's like been recorded in someone's bedroom. Whoever they got to like redub, they don't sound anything like any of the actors that they're redubbing either. Especially Bruce Willis's. It just doesn't sound... The best one, is obviously the one that gets quoted, is "Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon."
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It really is.
Yeah, I'm going to get on that straight away.
It's phenomenal.
Okay, so moving on to the stats and facts, that part of the podcast where we go over the release of this film, the money that it made at the box office, how it was received by critics, and what audiences generally think of this film. So starting with the box office, well, let's go through the budget first. For this film was $70 million. So $70 million, which was an increase on Die Hard's $28 million. Quite a significant increase, in fact.
Yeah.
The box office opened to $21 million at the US box office, and then to a total of $117 million in the US and $240 million worldwide. And just to give you an idea of the films that it was up against, well, Die Hard 2 opened, unsurprisingly, at number 1. And I will say as well, Andy, it is logged on Box Office Mojo as Die Hard 2, not Die Hard 2 Die Harder. Just Die Hard 2.
Yeah.
The thing that I think might solve this issue is how it's logged officially with the BBFC, because they have to take the official title of the movie.
Yeah, I think you'll find it'll be Die Hard 2.
So if we go for... Yeah, so you're right. Oh, wait, no. Okay, so here we go. So, Die Hard 2 has had several titles over the years. So, Die Hard 2 in 1990 was Die Hard 2.
Yeah.
Then, when it was re-released in 2002, it was Die Hard 2 Die Harder, but it looks like it's once more reverted back to Die Hard 2 again.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be like a constant back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a strange one. So number 1 was Die Hard 2. Number 2 was Days of Thunder. Number 3 was a soon-to-be Popcorn Digest episode, Dick Tracy. Number 4 was Jetsons the movie. Don't remember a Jetsons movie being
I
out
do.
that time. I don't remember that.
Very much belated.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Number 5 was the amazing Total Recall. Number 6 was Another 48 Hours. Number 7 was RoboCop 2. Number 8 was Ghost Dad. I think that was the everyone's favorite Bill Cosby film with the zapping and the zooping and the... anyway.
No.
And number 9 was Gremlins 2, The New Batch. And number 10 was Pretty Woman. So that is like a stacked weekend. It's incredible, actually.
That is just like classic after classic there. Apart from Ghost Dad.
Apart from Ghost Dad. Wait, no. Especially Ghost Dad.
Especially Ghost Dad.
I heard it was Jimmy Savile's favourite film.
Oh.
Okay, so...
Oh,
yes. I mean, even like you say, we say classic after classic. It's more so even that, like, it's sequels to classics as well, like RoboCop 2 and Another 48 Hours. So it's like, it's in a weekend where there are several very strong franchise films. So
we're living in the 21st century.
And yeah, I just want to as well, just to go back to the numbers, to give you an idea of what Die Hard was made with. So, as I mentioned, Die Hard's budget was significantly lower at $28 million. For its first wide release, it made $7 million worldwide. It made $83 million domestically and $141 million worldwide, which is like $100 million below Die Hard 2. So Die Hard 2 is a significant improvement in terms of the box office. And it makes me wonder, I wonder why Fox decided to put the brakes on the series for a little while after this. Because moving over to the critics' reception to the film, it wasn't poorly received either. It was actually, it's not the shining success that Die Hard was, but the Rotten Tomatoes score, for example, is 69%. 69! With an average rating of 6.28 out of 10. So it's not a runaway success, but it's, people are referring to it essentially as a solid sequel. It's solidly fresh.
The only thing I can think of, who bankrolled Hudson Hawk?
Oh, that could be the winning answer right there.
Yeah, because that's the only thing I can think of, is that the failure of Hudson Hawk may have put the brakes on.
So Hudson Hawk, 1991, and it is a... Oh, it's a TriStar picture.
Is it a TriStar? Okay.
It's a TriStar picture, yeah.
But even so, I think even if the studio hadn't been involved in it, I think something like Hudson Hawk may have done a bit of damage.
Yes, because it certainly did some damage to the Bruce Willis brand in terms of the way that studios perceived him as at that time as well. I know that he's mentioned that before. But yeah, so as mentioned, it's 69% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the consensus says it lacks the fresh thrills of its predecessor, but Die Hard 2 still works as an over-the-top and reasonably taut big-budget sequel with plenty of set pieces to paper over the plot deficiencies. I kind of mostly agree with that as well. Mm-hmm. And I've gone for another, obviously, Empire review as well for the critics' review. And this is from William Thomas at Empire Magazine, and he said, "It's more violent, more explosive, and even bigger than the original. This ticks all of the sequel boxes. But as long as Willis is in the vest and playing McClane, it's hard to care about its shortcomings."
He's not in a vest in this one.
Yeah, he's really not.
No.
This is what's going on, Empire?
In fact, he's actually only in the vest in the first one and the third one.
Yeah, exactly. And they gave it 3 out of 5. I mean, that sounds like it's a much more stronger review, really.
Yeah.
To say they gave it 3 out of 5 overall. They said it's entertaining nonsense that doesn't quite manage to recapture the magic of the original. Still, there are some nice moments here, and Willis is on solid ground as the iconic John McClane. I do agree with that.
Yeah.
However, Empire Magazine website does need some updating because they have the running time at 0 minutes. So it's a very short film.
You might have not seen the film then, like if he's talking about a vest and stuff.
Yeah. Okay, and just moving over to the IMDb score as well. The IMDb score for this film is 7.2 out of 10, and the audience score for it on Rotten Tomatoes is 70%, with an average rating of 3.69 out of 5. Honestly, there we go. Nice. So, yeah, I mean, it's all painting a picture of a solid film, if unremarkable.
Yeah.
Just a rather solid sequel.
It's fine.
Exactly. And I would agree. I would say that Die Hard 2, as much as I can pick it apart and mull over its shortcomings, I don't mind watching it. I think it's fine. One more thing that I do want to talk about when it comes to Die Hard as well, and we've talked about it being the trilogy. And I know that you won't really have much experience with this, but one of my big experiences of Die Hard is the Die Hard Trilogy PlayStation game. And I can't really speak about these films without just making mention of how good those games were, because it was one disc and it came with 3 arcade games, and each one was based on a Die Hard film. You had almost like a platformer level by level game where you were going up Nakatomi Plaza, defeating the bad guys, looking for a bomb on each floor. And then you had a second game, which was an on-the-rails shooter for Die Hard 2 in the airport. And if you had a light gun that you could point at your screen, that was great. And then you had Die Hard 3. That was one of the hardest racing games I'd ever played in my life, where you're in a taxi.
Yeah.
And your thing is you've got to drive about New York and explode bombs at different places in New York before they go off and kill everybody. And if you fail, like, a fucking nuke goes off over New York. So... And all the time as well, while you're driving, you get this guy doing like an impersonation of Bruce Willis going, "Why me? What's this got to do with me?" And I still say that when I'm in the car with Ali and, you know, something happens on the road. But yeah, so Die Hard, the PlayStation game, I know it's going to have many fans out there, and I was certainly a firm fan of that game. Loved it. Do you have any final thoughts to add about Die Hard 2, Die Harder?
Yeah, well, this was a question for the whole series, because I had this thought, and we're talking about Die Hard not really needing a sequel because it's very self-contained, but also within that, it's like, why, after the events of Die Hard 1, is John McClane still just a cop?
That's a really good question.
You would have thought he would be like, you know, in some sort of special forces or task force, or gone into some more specialist field.
Why isn't he taking his experience around, teaching people, like, you know, what he did? Why isn't he, like, got a fucking book deal? And,
yeah, I don't understand. It's like, it's a bit baffling that he's, even by, you know, the third one, he's still, you know, he's a washed up cop in that one. It's like,
yeah, well, I buy in Die Hard 3 because of the John McClane that it presents, that he's his own worst enemy. So I get what Die Hard 3 presents, but yeah, in this one especially, because he's still like a relatively sane and put together guy that isn't at all haunted by any like post-traumatic stress of his time in Nakatomi, because he's a man, you know? Yeah, why is he still just a cop? And why is everybody almost like treating him with disdain?
You did that thing, but
you did that thing in Nakatomi, but that doesn't matter shit to me. It's like, fucking hell, man. He killed like 20 terrorists.
Yeah. I had another thought as well, like going back to maybe why there was a gap. I'm thinking, is it because there were so many other Die Hard type movies?
Die Hard on a...
Like Under Siege and things like that.
Well, that became a phrase, didn't it? Film started to be pitched as Die Hard on a... and then ... And it pretty much invented the whole idea of high concept film. So yeah, I imagine so. I imagine that the series was saturated with those type of films to a point which, like I say, Die Hard with a Vengeance is not that type of film.
No.
Even though it does feel like, for me, a Die Hard film, you can't really describe it as being Die Hard on a ... or Die Hard in a ...
Well, it's Die Hard in the city.
I guess so.
That's
yeah,
what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that might have something to do with it. Hudson Hawk plus that kind of idea, trying to crack a script as well that stands out against that landscape. I imagine that was a tough nut to crack.
Yeah. Do you think this series has got anywhere else to go now, or do you think it's done?
I honestly think it's done. If Bruce Willis was an actor that was still trying... Because I do think that this whole thing hinges on two elements, and that is the director and Bruce Willis. And I think you can find a director with passion for the Die Hard series to make a Die Hard film. But I don't think Bruce Willis has the passion. And I think because of that, because of where Bruce Willis is in his career, the series essentially has to die. It has to go away. There's a reboot in its future, but they're going to find that without a Bruce Willis in his prime and without the elements that made Die Hard the success it was, it's just another action film. All it's going to have is the Die Hard name. If Bruce Willis still cared about acting in any way, shape, or form, despite the films that he's making now, if he was still showing that he had any interest or passion, then I would say that yes, there is still chance to make one like final Die Hard film. But I can't see that. I can't see that right now.
Yeah.
Okay, but I mean, all that said, I still think Die Hard 2, Die Hard, though of the trilogy, it's obviously the lesser one for me. Still a solid action film. Still a solid Die Hard film as well. Still feels Die Hard. Okay, and thank you for listening to this latest episode of Popcorn Digest. So obviously that is the second of our 2 Christmas specials, and we both hope you have a lovely, lovely Christmas. And you can expect to hear us again. We'll be back with our next season of Popcorn Digest on the 29th of January. But until then, it's bye from myself. Have a lovely Christmas.
And I'm gonna kick your fucking ass.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfuckers.
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon.
Thanks for listening.
When we finally kiss goodnight, how I hate going out in the storm. But if you really hold me tight, all the way home I'll be warm. The fire is slowly dying, and my dear, we're still goodbying. But as long as you love me so, let it snow.